The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Eye Test, brought to you by Belly Up Sports Media. I'm your host, John Kirkner, accompanied by co-hosts Paul Orlando and Bobby Amendola. And today's episode is another week of the Doghouse with a special twist. So stay tuned to see what that twist is. But I can hint it right now, there is going to be some controversy in tonight's episode. So stay tuned. We got a great one for you. Last week was our first time introducing players that became free men. So let's go ahead and start with that. Paul, we've got two men entering the freedom stage.
We do indeed. And if you missed our episode that released yesterday, be sure to check that out because we go into detail about Isaiah Pacheco and how he found his way to freedom. But alongside him, tasting sweet, free, fresh air is Damian Pierce. He had a decent game this week, put up 11.8 points against the Pittsburgh defense. This Houston Texans offense looks pretty fun. So Damian Pierce has found himself a free man after week 4. For now.
And only two players entering the freedom stage, which means there must be a lot of people in the probationary portal that maybe found their way back into the Doghouse. We'll get back to that later. Let's go ahead and talk about that probationary portal, Bob. Who do we got? We got a pretty decent crew here today.
We have a pretty notable crew here, actually. And it all starts with Garrett Wilson. We thought Garrett Wilson was dead because of, not literally dead, just fantasy dead, with Zach Wilson as his quarterback. Didn't turn out that way. Threw in 15 fantasy points, which is pretty much what you could really expect now if Zach Wilson is going to be an average quarterback. David Njoku had a decent game, put up 10 points, got his way into the probationary portal. Like Paul said, if you want to hear us talk more about Josh Jacobs and his breakout game, head on over to our previous episode, the Fantasy Awards episode. Drake London had almost 12 points. I know we expect more from him, but you can't really expect much in this offense at this point. So 12 points, finds his way into the probationary portal. Khalil Herbert, big breakout game against the Swiss cheese Denver defense. Almost 25 points, gets into the probationary portal from last week. And then we have Justin Fields, who against the Swiss cheese Denver defense put up almost 29 points, 4 passing touchdowns, which you rarely see out of Justin Fields. Found his way into the probationary portal after being a huge bust the first 3 weeks. And finally, we have Breece Hall making his way from the Doghouse into the probationary portal. Didn't have a what?
Probationary portal?
Yeah.
How?
What do you mean?
What did Breece Hall? Breece Hall does not deserve to be let go out of the Doghouse.
He absolutely does.
How?
Ladies.
What?
Ladies, let's I think we need to settle this in court.
Oh. Court, you say?
Yes.
Okay, I'll defend Breece Hall. I mean, I'm.
You're not defending Breece Hall,
yeah, I'm going to
John.
prosecute his
You
ass.
seem
That's
like
what
you
I'm
want to
gonna
prosecute him and throw him back in the Doghouse.
Yeah, I think he deserves to stay.
So you go ahead. Court is in session. You tell us why Breece Hall deserves to stay in the Doghouse.
All right, so Paul, you're the judge?
Yes, I'll be the judge, and John, you're the public defendant for Breece Hall, correct?
I'm going to be the prosecutor, actually.
I'm sorry, you're prosecuting Breece Hall for him to remain in the Doghouse, and Bob, you are the public defendant here to vouch for your sweet, sweet New York Jets and their running back, Breece Hall. All right, I will hear arguments from both parties, and then once I believe that I've had enough evidence to make a proper judgment, I will bestow that upon you. Please, who would like to take the stand first?
I'll take it. I call Breece Hall to the stand.
All right, Mr. Hall, step forward, please.
Okay. Look, Breece Hall, we all expected that within 4 weeks, Breece Hall will be back to normal. And it is not looking like he is. I mean, his snap count is really showing that. Starting from week 1, 10 attempts, 4 attempts, 12 attempts, 6 attempts. Not the Breece Hall that we once knew. And yeah, I get it. he tore his ACL and ended his season. But the whole thing was that after the first 4 weeks, we were expecting Breece Hall to get back to his normal self. In fact, even in week 1, it looked like he did. And then all of a sudden, it's like he just can't do it anymore. And you're saying that he deserves to get out of the doghouse after scoring just under 10 points, rushing the ball 6 times for 56 yards, and catching the ball 3 times for 13, scoring no touchdowns, doesn't break double digits, didn't even meet his projected score of 10.45. I think, ladies and gentlemen of the court, Breece Hall deserves to stay in the doghouse. And you know what? He can have his chance at probationary portal next week against the Swiss cheese Denver Broncos. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Amendola, your rebuttal?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm happy to be here, happy to be defending my wrongfully accused client. And there's a very simple reason. I think all of John's arguments actually are the case for Breece Hall to get out of the doghouse. Now,
objection, Your Honor.
Let the man speak, Mr. Kirkner. Sit back down.
Now, I understand he didn't hit his projection this week, which is normally our standard, but he did have 9.9. Are we really going to nickel and dime him over 0.5 points? That's literally 5 yards in most leagues. Let's not nickel and dime him. And I'm going to throw some stats at you for his, since you say he hasn't been playing out, which he hasn't. He hasn't played 50% of the snaps at all yet in any game. And over those games, he has 6.6 yards per carry, and he's averaging over 8 yards a catch. So the eye test is telling you, and even on limited opportunities, he is producing, but the opportunities haven't been there yet. So I think he deserves to get out because of those limited opportunities, and he has been productive in those limited opportunities. And also, what are we called here, guys? We are called the eye test. The eye test tells you that Breece Hall deserves to get out because he is the best running back in the Jets backfield, and he has a cake matchup this week, and this is going to be the game where hopefully the Jets decide that they play him over 50% of the snaps, and ultimately he will break out finally.
All right. Those are both compelling arguments. I will allow each of you 10 seconds for any final statements, Mr. Kirkner.
I just think Bob wants Breece Hall, a Jet fan, wants Breece Hall to be a free man because he knows if you can put him in the probationary period, he will become a free man against the Broncos in week 5.
The court has noted your statement, Mr. Amendola.
That's just not true. I'm the most unbiased person as they come. I would never conspire to get Breece Hall into freedom just based on his matchup. Would never happen.
Got it. Well, I appreciate you both, gentlemen. We're going to take a quick 15-minute intermission and come back. All right, the ruling is in. After discussing with the juror of your peers and myself, it was a tied vote from the jury, which means that I have to come down. I don't know if that's how it actually works in law, and I don't care. This is our court. So
I'm excited.
The ruling statement is, Mr. Hall, you stay in the doghouse.
To the doghouse.
Yes, you guys, you both brought some very compelling arguments here, but the big thing, Breece Hall was a pretty high draft pick this year and playing 50% of the snaps and not scoring over 10 points no matter how bad the offense is. He was still a very productive running back last year on an Aaron Rodgers-less New York Jets. I would expect at least some decent production. And Mr. Hall, you do have a very good chance of finding freedom soon. I do not foresee you in the doghouse much longer, but for now, you remain.
It's going to be hard for Breece Hall because he could get in probationary against Denver, but then he's got Philly and then a bye week. So it's going to be tough. But all right.
That Philly defense isn't what you think it is, John.
Yeah. Our D-line's looking nice. All right. Well, hey, we're going to start talking about the doghouse here, but we did clear out the doghouse pretty well. So let's go over and talk about the players that have left the doghouse and have landed a spot on Bust Island.
Yes. So Bust Island is becoming more and more populated as the weeks go. So we have Javonte Williams and Dalvin Cook up there. We got Dallas Goedert, Kyle Pitts. Oh my God. I bet you his little TP he's made on Bust Island is so nice because he's going to be there for a very long time. AJ Dillon and Jahmyr Gibbs. AJ Dillon, what an absolute disappointment. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, will get out of it eventually, but for now he remains. And of course, we have Antonio Gibson, Kadarius Toney, Cam Akers. T. Higgins is down there as well.
Oof.
And he's hurt, so I don't know what that means for him. But then we have someone who I think we least expected to find himself here. He is the highest paid man in football, mind you, and that is Joe Burrow.
No.
Joe Burrow's up there, dude. He's a bust.
Bust Island?
Yeah, he's a bust island, dude.
Absolutely Bust Island, John.
You think he's going to Bust Island?
Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
Dude, let's go back to court then.
We got to go back to court.
Okay.
I think we got to go back to court.
We got to go back to court.
Court is in session.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay, guys. John, we're back in court now.
Yeah.
Paul's going to be the judge again. I'm going to be prosecuting this time, and I'm prosecuting one of the highest paid men in football, if not the highest paid. I'm not exactly sure. And
the highest paid per yearly whatever crap.
Let's throw fantasy out there for a second. This man is the highest paid quarterback, highest paid player in the NFL. He should be performing better than he is. I know he may be hurt, but honestly, these numbers are just straight up unacceptable for Joe Burrow through 4 weeks. He is, again, we talked about it last week. He is the QB 31 through 4 weeks. He has 2 touchdown passes on the season. I've seen Joe Burrow throw 2 touchdown passes in a quarter, and he only has 2 through the first 4 games of the season. His highest scoring game through 4 weeks is 16 points. And honestly, he wasn't even that impressive during that game. And it's really, really bad for him. And you always have to take into account draft capital as well. This guy was being drafted as a top 5 quarterback, and he's not even a QB2, not even a low QB2. He's a mid QB3. There is no reason, especially after this last week when he was playing the supposed Swiss cheese Titans passing defense, he had a measly 4.7 points. Just not good enough for a guy that's paid this much. Just not good enough for a guy that was drafted this high. And frankly, there's no excuse because Joe Burrow has produced better even when he's had less weapons. So I rest my case, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Amendola. Mr. Kirkner, it's your turn to take the stand.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Burrow, thanks for coming today. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I present to you today a case showcasing a violation of Mr. Burrow's 8th Amendment.
Gasp.
Yes.
Oh my God, we're playing.
Yes, that is right. This is cruel and unusual punishment, a pure violation of Mr. Burrow's 8th Amendment. And I understand that the stats are showcasing that Joe Burrow is not having a good season. And I understand that he was drafted as a top 5 quarterback, but do we forget the calf injury that he sustained?
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Your Honor, Mr. Amendola is talking.
Mr. Amendola. Mr. Amendola.
Thank you. He had a calf injury in the preseason, and it is clearly lingering. And I am not saying that Joe Burrow is having a good season, but me, as the defendant, I am trying to keep him off of Bust Island because he does not deserve it. Does he deserve the doghouse and to stay in there? Yes, I'm not arguing for a probationary portal. I am defending him to stay in the doghouse where he belongs. Sending him to Bust Island is pure, cruel, and unusual punishment, a violation of the 8th Amendment. Thank you.
Compelling argument there, Mr. Kirkner. All right, I will allow each, whatever your guys' title is as lawyers, 10 seconds of a final statement. Mr. Amendola.
Mr. Amendola Esquire, thank you. We are a fantasy show. If Joe Burrow's hurt, he shouldn't be playing. We care about stats at the end of the day, and he's just not producing.
Mr. Kirkner.
Well, perfect. If we care about stats, then let's go back to Brees Hall of 2023, where stats do not matter.
Different
The
court
eye-
case. Different court
the eye
case.
test
Different
mattered.
court case.
It's the same
Different-
thing as Roe v.
No,
Wade.
you
This
can't
is
bring
Hall
in-
v. eye test.
You
You
can't
were
bring
focused on
in-
the eye test.
I will have order in my court. I will have order in my court. All right, gentlemen. Thank you for your arguments. We're going to take a quick 15 intermission. There are refreshments in the back. The coffee's actually from Dunkin', so it's not
Oh.
complete
I'll
bullshit
just
like
have-
it usually is. Please feel free to grab yourself a cup and a donut. We'll be back.
Thank you. Okay, we got frosted donuts.
All right, gentlemen. After reviewing of a jury of your peers and myself, oh my God, look, it's a split vote again. It's up to me again. That's crazy how this keeps happening. And I am going to have to send Joe Burrow to Bust Island.
No.
That is where
This is a
he
violation.
belongs. He has played awful this year, and maybe it's because I put a lot of money on a Jamar Chase touchdown this week, and they did not score a single one on offense. Joe Burrow, you have been an absolute disappointment this year. And like Mr. Amendola mentioned, the high draft capital, top 5 quarterback, excuse me, top 5 quarterback predictions here. He's nowhere near it. He is borderline cuttable. If his name wasn't Joe Burrow, he would not be on your fantasy team this year. So, Joe Burrow, welcome to Bust.
John really tried to bring in the injury excuse
All
on
I'm
a
sa-
fantasy
Last
show.
time we ever have a judge that put money on a player, like of course he sends him to Bust Island. This is
No,
biased.
but Paul came down to reason. Paul, if his name wasn't
Oh.
Joe Burrow, you would easily put him in Bust Island.
Okay, well, Joe Burrow joins the rest of the crew at Bust Island. Let's go ahead and check out the players that are going from the probationary portal to the Doghouse. And that starts out with George Kittle. Bob?
Yes, George Kittle.
Let's recap week 4 and predict week 5. See if you can get back to the probationary portal.
Yeah, we were all kind of optimistic after George Kittle had his mini breakout in week 3. He had 16 points, but it went completely south for him in week 4. And the Niners put up a lot of offense in week 4, but it completely ran through CMC. George Kittle only had 1 target, 1 catch for 9 yards, 1.9 points. And aside from CMC, and it kind of seems like Brandon Ayuk is, taking over a little bit as well. It's pretty hard to predict this Niners offense as it always has been. George Kittle doesn't seem to be as much of a focal point anymore with the rise of other guys. And going up against the Dallas defense next week, unless it's pretty much just a dart throw at this point. And I'm not willing to say that George Kittle is going to be able to meet his 9.5 point projection in this game. Tough defense, unpredictable offense. George Kittle stays in the doghouse after being put back in the doghouse.
So basically what you're saying is he comes back to the Doghouse after being put in probationary portal.
What?
You just said a lot of dog houses there.
Yeah, that's okay.
I said he came back. I said he's going to stay in the doghouse after coming back to the doghouse.
Oh, he did go Doghouse, probationary portal, Doghouse,
did.
didn't he?
He did.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, another guy coming back to the Doghouse from the probationary portal is Alexander Madison. And honestly, it was a close call, but we did agree to throw Madison back. He had in the last 2 weeks, he's averaged about 18 rush attempts and 94 yards, which is pretty nice, but he's not scoring touchdowns yet. So we need to see a touchdown out of Madison to really boost his score like above his projection, which he did in week 3, but not week 4, just falling short. Cam Akers is on the team. He didn't do much. He had like 5 rush attempts. But I mean, hey, we could see a little boost in Cam Akers eating into Alexander snaps. Madison goes against Kansas City next week in week 5. I'm going to go ahead and say Madison does it. I do think having Cam Akers there is taking some pressure off of Madison. even though he probably is still like the 3 down back, it probably doesn't feel that way. Breece Hall was able to get close to double-digit points. I think Madison right now is healthier than Breece Hall and honestly better. So I'll go Madison gets back to the probationary portal in week 5. And then he's got Chicago week 6. He could find himself as a free man.
Yeah, and then coming in after him is the Bengals offense does seem to be a theme for this Doghouse episode. It's Ja'Marr Chase, and I'm sorry, guys. He's got to remain here. From the guy who was the consensus number 2 overall, if not number 3 overall pick, it has been extremely disappointing. A lot of it is probably due to Joe Burrow's play as well. He saw 9 targets. The volume's been there, but he made 7 catches for 73 yards, and yes, that was good for 14.3 points. But when you have a pick of his caliber and a player of his talent on your team, the floor should be 20 points. The floor needs to be 20 points for your team to really sustain competitiveness in this league, and it's just not there, unfortunately. First 2 weeks, he didn't even score 10. Week 3, he had a really good game, but again, no touchdowns. We have not seen a touchdown from Ja'Marr Chase this year, and it cost me some money last week. But I digress. They do get a date with the Arizona Cardinals. Hopefully it's a get-right game for Ja'Marr Chase and their fantasy value. But as a Ravens fan, I hope they suck.
All right, so we can welcome those guys back to the Doghouse. Let's talk about the players that are staying in the Doghouse. First up, running back for the Buccaneers, Rachaad White.
I know you didn't just say Rachaad White.
I mean, he had 10 points.
I mean, I know you didn't just say Rachaad White, who is seeing
Paul
70% snaps in a bad offense, but still seeing PPR volume.
This offense isn't that bad as you think it is.
The offense isn't great.
Hold on, order. I'm gonna be the judge here. Let's take this to court.
We're going to court again.
Court is officially in session. Bob will be the prosecutor. Paul will be the defendant, obviously, because he has a order in his Amazon cart for the Rachaad White fathead that doesn't even exist yet.
It will.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to bring Mr. White on the stand. Mr. White, come to the stand. I will be the judge of this. I want full cooperation, silence, and only speak when you are spoken to. Okay? So we will start with Mr. Amendola.
No,
you may
let Paul start.
No, you're the prosecutor.
No.
Okay. Bob resigns. We will.
I don't resign. I just want to wait for.
Okay.
All right.
Even though I'm the judge, I'm somehow getting played by the prosecutor. You're damn good prosecutor. Mr. Orlando, you may go first.
All right. Well, I think Mr. Amendola thinks that he has an ace up his sleeve, but hear me out and let me explain to you why my client, Mr. White, deserves to not stay in this doghouse. So, Mr. Rachaad White was drafted in the late 8th, early 9th round of most fantasy drafts. And to most, that is considered someone as a bench stash, as someone who you need to start somewhere in a pinch. Not someone who should be consistently on your starting lineup unless it's with injuries. And I'm here to tell you, anytime that you can find a workhorse back of this caliber in that range, he should not be in the doghouse. Week 2, yes, it was against Chicago, but we saw the potential in Mr. White's performance. He put up 21 points, 17 carries for 73 yards. It's amazing what happens when your offensive line actually blocks people. Tampa's offense, we saw it in Philly. They were getting bullied by those green men from Broadway Avenue, wherever you guys have your stuff.
Broad Street,
whatever.
Hey.
And then he comes back against New Orleans, a division rival. That's always a physical game. That's always close, always, rough and tough. And he put up almost 11 points. That's a flex-worthy play right there. He saw, yet again, 70% of the snaps, 15 carries. He was effective in the pass game, catching all three of his targets. So he's getting you those PPR numbers. Is he scoring touchdowns this year? No, he only has 1, but that's because Baker Mayfield has this weird thing for Mike Evans. But guess what? Mike Evans is hurt. So where is Mr. Baker Mayfield going to turn to? Check down Baker. He's going to turn to Rachaad White. And so, Judge, Your Honor, you beautiful fedora-wearing man, I am asking you to please consider give Rachaad White this break and let him prove to you after the bye that he deserves to be a free man. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orlando. We will move over to Mr. Amendola unless he has another thing that he'd rather do.
No, I think I'll take my time now. And thank you, Mr. Orlando. It's an honor to have you here, even though as an adversary in
You
this
as
setting.
well, Esquire.
In this setting.
Esquire
But
Amendola.
I need to be honest, Your Honor. I'm going to go through some stats, and then I'm going to give you a little something that I think is going on behind the scenes about why Mr. Orlando is doing what he's doing. So,
Don't look at my Amazon order. Don't look at my Amazon order.
Rachaad White is, by all accounts, by all measures, by all metrics, outside of biases by certain fantasy analysts, a mediocre running back. He is a mediocre running back. That's what he is. And his stats show that. And his performance outside of a few outliers show that. So this season, I will say, he is in RB2 territory. But like Mr. Orlando perfectly said, he's had one good game. And it was against the Chicago Bears, who, as we all know, can't play defense. They don't know how to play defense. And they somehow managed to let a mediocre running back have nearly 22 points against them. Credit to him there. Outside of that, he has not hit his projection in any of the other 3 games. Didn't hit his projection this past week against the Saints. He had 10.8 points. He was projected 12. Just not good enough. Just not good enough for a guy that's your RB2. Maybe you accept 10 points. Maybe you don't. But it's just not good. And he's averaging 3.2 yards per carry this year. I would not be happy with that as a starting running back. I would not want that. I wouldn't even want that as a flex play. And people talk about how he's this amazing pass catcher. He only has 13 catches this season, so less than 4 catches a game. And he's only averaging 6 points, a little over 6.5 yards a catch. Not that great. He just doesn't pass the eye test at all. And he does have the volume. I will say that. Does have the volume. So I've given you the stats now, given you the performance, single-digit games, pretty much barely cracked double digits in this past game. But I have reason to believe that Mr. Orlando is having an affair with Rachaad White.
Yes.
An affair? Have you had relations with Rachaad White?
Was it the wink in the courtroom that gave it away? Like what?
Mr. White, is this true?
You don't have to answer that, Mr. White.
There's a clear conflict of interest here, Your Honor. I will let you digress, deliberate, but I had to get it out. I'm done.
I appreciate everyone's arguments. I will have a 10-second closing argument by Mr. Orlando starting now.
Listen, I find my client, Mr. White, very attractive, but we have not had any relations of that sort in any way. I can assure you, he's a good-looking cat, but I just don't swing that way.
And Mr. Amendola, do you swing that way?
I do not swing that way, but
Okay.
I have there's too much going on here for Paul to relentlessly defend a mediocre running back. Then I need to believe there's something going on behind the scenes. He's just, the numbers just say that he's mediocre.
That sounds like hearsay to me, Your Honor.
We will close the argument. And let me tell you, I honestly had an opinion before this, and you guys both did a very good job at swaying me both ways. And then Bob said the affair thing, and I'm starting to think it's true. And I just don't know. Like, if
all right, maybe we don't post this episode, guys, please. Okay.
I almost want to put this up for poll for our voters, but I have to do my job as a judge. Oh man. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna say that Rachaad White needs to stay in the doghouse.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And Bob and Paul, your arguments were very true about where he was drafted. However, there are players that are drafted much later that are making starting rosters, like Nico Collins and Tank Dell as flex because of their upside. Rashad White is not necessarily showing that. With the volume that he's getting, any other running back would be putting up more yards per carry. And although Rashad White has not dropped a pass yet, he's not scoring touchdowns. And so for that reason, we need to see Rashad White have a couple more games closer to that 21 mark. But as of now, majority rule says that he scores closer to the 7-point mark. So
All right,
Mr.
well,
White,
you guys
can
try
stay in
running
the
behind that
doghouse.
offensive line.
That was good. That was a very good court session. All
I
right.
did not see the affair coming at all. I thought that was pretty under wraps.
All right. So let's head on over back to the doghouse and talk about the players that are staying in the doghouse now with Mr. White. We will start out from Bob, DeAndre Hopkins, getting comfy.
DeAndre Hopkins is getting very comfy there, and it's unfortunate because he was an amazing fantasy asset for years with Deshaun Watson, and even for the first couple years when he was in Arizona with Kyler Murray. But now in this Tennessee Titans offense that seems like it's being run like it's the 1990s again, DeAndre Hopkins just isn't producing. You want to call it the offense, Tannehill, whatever. There's the numbers. He's not producing. The most points he had was back in week 1 so far, 13.5. Didn't score a touchdown. Still doesn't have a touchdown. This past week, he scored 10.3 against Cincinnati in a game where they were pretty much blowing Cincinnati out the whole time. Still only putting up that much. Still just not getting a lot of volume. And we know this offense runs through Derrick Henry and maybe even Tyjae Spears a little bit at this point. I don't really see that changing. Next week, he goes up against Indianapolis. Division matchups projected 12.2 points. Wide receivers have done okay against the Colts. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say he does get that 12 points and gets into the probationary portal, even though I'm not confident at all in it.
All right. Well, another guy staying in the doghouse, a disappointing one, but that is Trevor Lawrence. And at first, I was thinking about possibly bringing this to the stand, but I did some research before I freaked out. And I wanted to see, because Trevor Lawrence was drafted as like the quarterback 6. And the quarterback 6 last year, by the end of the season, was still averaging like around 18 points. So Trevor Lawrence is not doing that. With his horrible performance in week 2 against Kansas City, his average is probably somewhere around like 13, 14. And, he just can't touch that 20-point mark, which we do want to expect out of a player like Trevor Lawrence, especially with the offensive weapons he has. I would say this was probably one of the better games that he's had. 23 for 30, throwing 1 touchdown, no interceptions, which was nice. Showcased his rushing upside a little bit. But he's just not throwing for enough yards. We really want to see him touch that 300 mark, which he hasn't done once this season. Next week, he goes against Buffalo. And everyone who has Trevor Lawrence on their roster, I think people love to get swarmed by matchups. And what I've noticed is there are a lot of quarterbacks, especially, that when they have a tough matchup, they do tend to bring their A game. The coaches prepare just a little bit more, maybe some trick plays or something like that, anything to beat the Bills. So I'm also going to go out on a limb here and say that this week against Buffalo is going to be the first game that he touches 20 points. And he may throw a pick, but I think we're going to see a lot of yards thrown from Trevor Lawrence and more than 1 touchdown. To get him to maybe a performance like he did in week 1, which was nice, 18 points. But again, we need to see a little bit more. If he didn't throw that pick, he would have been up there. So I'm going to go ahead and say that he outperforms his projection in week 5 and finds himself in the probationary portal.
Yeah, that would be nice for Trevor Lawrence. He had a lot of high hopes going into this year as well. And moving down the list here is Najee Harris. He is staying in the doghouse. And guys, if I took away the pictures and the names and I gave you just a player comparison and one was Jaylen Warren and one was Najee Harris, you would not be able to tell who had what game. They both put up around 11 points this week. They are both seeing nearly an even split in that backfield. Najee Harris played only 49% of the snaps. But the big kicker here is that Jaylen Warren is the pass catching back on this team. Najee is running the ball. He did have 14 rushes for 71 yards this week. That was good for over 5 yards per carry. But again, that was against the Houston Texans. And, excuse me, he's not putting up touchdowns. He barely eclipsed 11 points this week. And this was, believe it or not, his best game of the year. He's mostly sitting around 5 and 6 points. And right now, from a guy you drafted in the 3rd round, maybe early 4th, he is not the RB1, borderline RB1, solid RB2 that you were hoping for. And his counterpart, Jaylen Warren, is probably sitting on the waiver wire, if not a bench stash in your league, and you can get similar production from him. I have been disappointed with Najee Harris. I was really big on him coming into this year, but I think that the writing is on the wall. He gets a date with my Baltimore Ravens next week, who we do have a good run defense, and then he's got a bye on week 6. So Najee Harris will probably be camping out in the doghouse for the next couple of weeks.
Or maybe Bust Island.
Maybe even Bust Island if he has a putrid game against the Ravens.
He deserves it.
All right, last guy staying in the doghouse. We'll get to the 4 players that are entering after this.
Yep. I think Najee Harris definitely deserves Bust Island if he has another putrid week. But moving on to this guy that had a breakout week 1 after a couple years off and has kind of fallen off since then, and that's Calvin Ridley. This past week, only 2 targets. He did have a touchdown that saved his week, but still only put up not even 12 points in PPR leagues. I know everyone got so excited, and I did too. After week 1, he put up 23, but it's been a 5, 7, and then 11 the past 3 weeks. And it kind of coincides with Trevor Lawrence being, mediocre so far. But John, I agree with you in the aspect. I think there's a little bit of like a reverse psychology going on with this matchup against the Bills. They are at Buffalo, which is a little bit concerning. And the Buffalo defense has been very good this week. And they just shut down Miami's offense. But it feels like this is like a do or die game for the Jaguars. A lot of hype going into this season for the Jags. They're going to have something to prove this week. They may not win the game, but I think they're going to play well. And I think that's going to result in, like you said, Trevor Lawrence. And I think it's going to coincide with Calvin Ridley outperforming his expectation of 12 points this week. They're going to rise to their A game. And I think they're going to be ready. Maybe he doesn't have a massive game like he did in week 1, but I think it'll be good enough for him to get into the probationary portal.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Jags are going to have to bring their A game. All right,
and the Bills just lost Tre'Davious White for the season. So something to remember and look out for.
All right, so we are welcoming 4 new members to the Doghouse. One of them won an award in our fantasy award show on yesterday's episode. You can check that out on YouTube. Jaylen Waddle won a free ticket. Everyone is upset with him, and he is now waddling into the showers of the Doghouse.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Jaylen Waddle is getting ready to enter the Doghouse. And like we said in our fantasy award episode, he seems to be the middle child at this point. Tyreek Hill's the older brother that everyone knows, everyone loves, everyone pays attention to. And it seems like the Miami running game, specifically Devon Achane, is the little brother that's the new, sexy thing that everyone's like, whoa, so cute. Let's play with him more. And Jaylen Waddle's just forgotten about in the middle. So far this season, he did miss a game last week in week 3. But this season, he hasn't eclipsed six targets. And you expect more from him for a guy that was a wide receiver 1 last year. Doesn't have a touchdown yet. I do believe he did have a touchdown called back, but still that's resulted in his best game being 12.5 points against New England in week 2. And there was a lot of draft capital spent on this guy. You're talking a late 2nd round pick, early 3rd round pick. Just hasn't produced the results that you wanted. And Now you're starting to wonder, as an owner, is it going to be just a Tyreek Hill and Miami running game season? Because last year, Miami's running game wasn't as good as it has been so far this season. So is Jaylen Waddle going to be the forgotten about guy? Unfortunately, I think he will be. So now you're just expecting, like, is he going to, he does go against the Giants in week 5, and they've been really bad. Their defense has
Yeah.
been really bad. But their running game's good. I don't know. I just feel optimistic this week, I guess, with some of these Doghouse
Yeah.
guys.
No,
But
I like it. I like it.
and the projections aren't crazy. He's projected a little under 12 points. I think he's going to get it against this Giants defense. The Dolphins should easily have their way. So Jaylen Waddle won't need that much to get 12 points this week.
I agree. All right, next guy entering in the Doghouse is Ramondre Stevenson. Honestly, for a guy that was drafted in the second, third round, he's not performing like it really ever. I mean, first 2 weeks were somewhat nice. Maybe you were expecting like, hey, that's just a warm up. I mean, he started out with six targets, 6 receptions in week 1 for 64 yards. Only has 1 touchdown on the season, but week 4 against Dallas, week 3 against the Jets, he's really just not done well at all. He's still playing in a lot of snaps. He hasn't touched 20 snap attempts yet, but he's just not getting the yards that we want. Besides week 1, he's not getting the yards in rushing or in the reception game. And he goes against New Orleans in week 5, and I do not think that he's going to exceed expectations because Saints defense is looking pretty good, especially their linebacking core. So I think Bill Belichick has kind of moved on, which we unfortunately did make everyone weary of. Bill Belichick does not care about fantasy points. He doesn't care. All he cares about is winning. And I mean, he's not even really doing that. So if Bill Belichick does want to get back to winning, maybe he should use Ramondre Stevenson more, but he's not. I think he's trying to make Mac Jones look better. And he's really trying to like show that he made the right pick there. And he's trying to make Mac Jones be the winner. But if he really wants to win, it'll be Ramondre Stevenson. And if he uses Ramondre like he has in week 5, he's going to stay in the Doghouse.
Yeah, and the Bill Belichick era might be over sooner than you think in New England if they continue to lose ball games. But seeing the Doghouse this week is another guy that I was personally super, super high on going into this year, and it's Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver for the Broncos. Believe it or not, his 3 catches for 52 yards on Sunday against the Chicago Bears led the team in receiving. How sad is that? It's a combination of Russell Wilson passing to nobody we know. The touchdowns always seem to go to guys that we have absolutely no clue who they are, and the touchdowns are scarce alone, especially up until this Chicago game. And Jerry Jeudy has just been disappointing. He hasn't seen more than 7 targets. Yet he did miss week 1 against the Raiders, which would have been a juicy matchup. I wonder how much his hamstring is bothering him from the preseason or what's going on here. But still, it is just disappointing. He's only eclipsed 10 points once, and he gets a date with the New York Jets and Sauce Gardner and that defense next week. And it depends where Sauce Gardner is on the field. That's really what happens if Jeudy has a decent game or not. Hopefully he follows Cortland Sutton and not Jerry Jeudy, but just an overall disappointment for Jerry Jeudy this year. If you drafted him as a high upside wide receiver too, yikes.
Right. All right, we got one more guy entering the Doghouse, Bob.
All right, closing it out now. And this is a guy that was that's definitely been forgotten about through the first 4 weeks of the season, but did have some hype going into fantasy drafts and everything. And that's Brandon Cooks. Guy was there was the Dallas Cowboys last season didn't have a wide receiver too because Michael Gallup was coming off an ACL, clearly wasn't himself. So the Cowboys went out, got a wide receiver too in Brandon Cooks, and people thought, oh, he's going to perform well, alongside CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, Cowboys offense. He should be okay. People were actually talking about maybe him even sneaking in to the wide receiver 2 conversation. And it just has completely gone south. It hasn't happened. He's missed 1 game. His highest total points so far was this past week against the Patriots when they completely blew him out. It was 5.7 points. It just looks like it's not going to happen. and you're just hoping for a random day where he'll get a touchdown or Dak Prescott will decide, hey, I'm going to target Brandon Cooks more. But it doesn't look like there's going to be any consistency to it. Now that Michael Gallup's healthy, obviously CeeDee Lamb is the wide receiver one there. Even Jake Ferguson is performing better than Brandon Cooks. So it's just a dart throw at this point. He finds himself in the doghouse. They're on the road at San Francisco, whose defense, has been good this year, but I don't think it's as good as it was last year. They're not really getting to the quarterback as much. So maybe there'll be more opportunities for Dak Prescott to air it out, but I wouldn't expect those targets to be going to Brandon Cooks that much. And I find it hard to believe that he's going to crack 8 points this week. So I think he's going to stay in the doghouse.
All right. Well, that was a lot, but great job, gentlemen. I do have one correction, stat correction for today. The Jaguars and the Bills are actually playing in London. Jags are playing in London again. So,
wow.
all the more reason for the Jaguars to possibly now maybe even beat the Bills.
Yeah.
But
good point.
that
Good
really
catch.
does help our case there. So, hey, that was a great Doghouse episode. Had a great time debating those 3 players on the stand. We will be back next week for more fantasy awards and another episode of the Doghouse. Thank you, everyone, for watching on YouTube and everyone listening on Apple and Spotify. We will see you next week for Week 5 recap and Week 6 prediction.
Peace.